So, Annabelle, you'll see that my words this morning were inspired by yours. I really started thinking about the topic of corpse after you gave yours. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but you worked hard on yours, you found the connection, and I have been thinking about it a lot. This past Sunday, I was driving home from officiating at the unveiling of our beloved past president, Mark Weiner, when I heard on the radio that the remains of a soldier killed in Pearl Harbor had recently been identified. Family members said that they expected 1,000 people to attend the funeral of Fireman Third Class Harold Kendall Bud Costello, who was 18. A battleship USS West Virginia sailor killed in the Japanese attack on December 7th, 1941. His body was only recently returned from Hawaii to his Clayton, New Jersey home for burial after it was finally identified. His 93-year-old brother, Gene, the only surviving sibling of the 5 Costello children, oversaw his brother's return and invited the entire town to his services. This really struck me for numerous reasons. First, I was on my way home from a cemetery where Mark's family and friends had been able to give him a proper burial 10 months ago and pay homage to his memory by unveiling a beautiful headstone that captured the essence of who he was. But it also struck me because it spoke to the depths of what it means to care for our dead. That over 70 years have passed, almost 80, but it doesn't matter. We don't just leave the remains, we do the hard work of trying to find them. And if possible, when possible, giving them a proper burial. This has also been on my mind this week, of course, as we've commemorated the 18th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11. Lastly, it struck me because of what I imagine will be the increased number of those lives that were lost in the Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian, and a realization that not all the bodies might be found. While this feels like a grim topic to speak of, as I mentioned earlier, if you were reading closely, I chose the best of the worst. But here's the thing. We need to talk about our bodies. We need to talk about how we care for them, because I believe that each of us is inherently imbued with holiness, both in terms of body and spirit. This morning, I would like us to contemplate the nature of our bodies. How do we treat them? How does this help us understand our relationship with God? Because if we make this equation, that how we treat our bodies helps us understand our spiritual relationship with God, I actually believe that we will be reminded of treating our bodies with holiness, both when we are alive and when we are gone. This week's Parsha, Ki Tetzei, which contains within it 74 of the 613 mitzvot, teaches, as Annabelle shared, that if a man is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death and you impale him on a stake, you must not let his corpse remain overnight. You must bury him that same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God, and you shall not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. There are certainly many different directions we can go with this verse. We could have had a conversation about capital punishment, but today I want to focus on the second part, that if you do in fact put a person to death by hanging them, you must bury them the very same day. So Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson asks, why is an impaled body an offense to God? Wouldn't this humiliated corpse serve a valuable preventative function, since all who saw it would resolve not to commit a similar offense, which is just a different offense against God? If so, wouldn't it be a good thing to leave the body hanging? Besides, the person isn't the same as the body anyway, or is it? The body is relatively unimportant, you might think, like a used set of clothing that no longer fits. So who cares about how the body is treated? But of course, we as Jews don't believe that. We believe that our body goes from dust to dust, and yet there is something holy. Rabbi Artson says, apparently the Torah doesn't accept the trivialization of the body. Rashi adds to the Torah that it's a slight to the king, to God, because humanity is made in the likeness of God's image, and we are all God's children. This is incredible. That if we make a decision to put somebody to death, we still have to treat that body with respect. So how do we understand how this commandment can then apply to our lives? Because most of us are not going to be in the decision, God forbid, of being the one put to death, or even, God forbid, being the one making the decision to do so. The commandment to remove the corpse from the stake on that which is impaled teaches us this importance of respecting our body. And we learn that we must take responsibility for a corpse, whether we have a personal or loving relationship to that body or not. In last week's Parsha, we were reminded that if a person is found dead in between two cities, so it's not quite from this town, and it's not quite from that town, nobody can say they're not from our town. No one is absolved from the responsibility of caring for the dead. People from both towns must come together to take care of that body. So we see that caring for our physical body is in and of itself, an act of holiness. What we eat, how we act, what we do each day are small decisions that we need to take with care. Last week, I was speaking with Robin and Bruce Beagle-Eyes, members of our shul, who were up in Syracuse at the end of August, and they were at the New York State Fair. So I lived in Syracuse for 7 years, and we went to the New York State Fair every year. Have any of you been to the New York State Fair? A few of you? It's a little, thank you, Dave. It is a little bit of a observation, unfortunately, of the obesity crisis in this world. And I say that with all seriousness. The amount of food that is out and the amount that people consume, that which is fried, that which has butter, that everything. I'm not saying don't enjoy a croissant here or there, but the amount of food at that state fair was crazy. And it reminded me of the documentary that came out years ago called Super Size Me. Right? Some of you, okay? Super Size Me. Where this was a person's quest to see what would happen if he ate fast food for only 30, not only 30 days, only fast food for 30 days. The results were devastating. The amount of bad foods that this person ate was horrendous. This is what happens when we aren't conscious about what we are eating. Coincidentally, in this week's Parsha, we are told that if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his parents, when they chastise him and he doesn't listen to him, then here is what the parents are supposed to do. His father and mother take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gates of the place, and they shall say to the elders of the city, "This is our son, a stubborn and rebellious son. He doesn't listen to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Now this is really interesting because how old must this child be to still be able to be pulled out by his parents, and yet he's called a glutton and a drunkard? What could possibly be going on that child is doing that? And then all of the men of the city stone him with stones that he shall die. And you should put him away, so that evilness disappears. Now, the rabbis very quickly show that this actually never happened, but it's a really good warning for kids and parents alike. I am not advocating for the stoning of our children, and I am certainly not advocating for the community having permission to stone those children that you don't like. But it is really interesting that it's about a glutton and a drunkard, because that is saying that those are acts of being a bit rebellious. And I don't think it's about the issue of losing control, and I'll talk about this in a second. There are many isms that we confront. But the question is, when do we cross that line of not treating our body with a sense of holiness and respect? How do we as parents make sure that the dinners that we have at home have healthy choices, so that when we're out and we're eating, we know what to choose, and then a cycle of healthiness continues. There is nothing wrong with snacks and with fun foods, but it's all about moderation. It's all about the choices that we make. There are many other areas in our lives that remind us that we need to take care of our bodies. Healthy eating, good exercise, occasionally sleeping. The question that naturally arises then is, why are we so sad and so disappointed when we hear about the most athletic among us, the sports heroes in our midst, who either use performance-enhancing drugs or who OD completely? I think back to earlier this summer when MLB starting pitcher Tyler Skaggs was found dead. People were beside themselves. And last week, it became clear that he had opioids in his system. The MLB is now saying that they're not just going to check for performance-enhancing drugs, but they're in fact also going to start doing drug testing. This is a really interesting statement. Is it because they just want their players to be alive? I'm sure that's a piece of it. But maybe it's also about the issue, I'd like to think, of role models, and how do we confront this issue of drug abuse? Because our sadness comes from people not just cheating the system, which was the challenge of all of the performance-enhancing drugs, but the challenge of people getting addicted to substances which literally kill them. How do we help ourselves and others remember that we should appreciate and elevate their bodies to a level of holiness rather than make decisions that break ourselves down? This applies back to the Talmud, to Hillel the elder, who once, when he concluded his studies with his disciples, walked among them. And then he started to enter a bathhouse. His disciples asked him, "Master, where are you going?" He answered, "To perform a religious duty." "What is this religious duty?" they asked. "You're about to go into the bathroom." He said, "To wash in the bathhouse." "That's a religious duty?" they said. "Yes," he replied. "If the statues of kings which are erected in theaters and circuses are scoured and washed by men who are appointed to look after them, how much the more so that I, who have been created in the image and likeness of God, should wash myself." We see that Hillel is showing that bathing the body is an obligation, since we are created in the image of God, and even the most mundane of moments in our lives, taking a shower, is something imbued with holiness. In the coming weeks, 2 weeks, we really shift to the high holidays, where we think about where we came from and where we are headed. We will remind ourselves that we, like everyone else, was created, and at some point, we will all go from dust to dust. Though we all hope it's Ad Mea Ve'esrim until 120, the events of this week, the unveiling, the return of the body from Pearl Harbor, the remains of those who were murdered on 9/11, those lost in the Bahamas, make us think deeply about our bodies. We must think about our humanity. We are reminded that we are given a gift of life that we must nurture and take care of. And we must encourage others to do the same, so that we can all appreciate what we have here on this earth. Shabbat Shalom.